Okay, ready if you are. I'd like to call this meeting to order, a special meeting of the Village Board on Wednesday, March 30th at 6 p.m. in the Germantown Village Hall Boardroom and also can be accessed via WebEx. This meeting has been given public notice in accordance with sections 19.83 and 19.84 of the Wisconsin statutes in such form that will apprise the general public and news media of subject matter that is intended for consideration and action. Roll call shows all village board members present except for Trustee Myers, who may be joining us later, Trustee Kaminsky, who is excused, and Trustee Miller, who I know is going to be joining us later. He said that he was going to be late and probably arrive around 6:30. At this time, I will ask us all to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is informational presentation of the Village of Germantown providing sewer and water to the Village of Richfield's Northeast Corridor and the Intergovernmental Agreement. We have several presenters tonight to take us through each of the different phases and parts of information about this agreement. We have visuals as well, so check whatever screen works best for you based on where you're sitting in the room. Thank you all for coming tonight. After we have the presentation, we will have a portion of this meeting to allow citizen input and public appearance. That is the whole purpose of this meeting, is to present you the information and the details that we now have about the intergovernmental agreement between Richfield and Germantown for extending sewer and water services, and for you to give us information back about your concerns, your comments, or any questions that you might have after this presentation. So we'll get the presentation started because we all, want to get going and not spend as much time as we, as I do here. But I'll turn the meeting then over to our village attorney to start the presentation going. Brian.
I think that means I just say I'm done, right? And then we go?
No.
So good evening. Going to start by just going through a little bit of the background of kind of how we got to the particular location that we're at now. Back in December of 2019, Richfield staff approached village staff to inquire about water and sewer service to a portion of Richfield. That portion of Richfield is approximately 443 acres. That's they classify as the Northeast Corridor. If we look at the map here, the Northeast Corridor is this area that's kind of in the orange on the west side of I-41. In the blue is the area that you'd recognize. The Briggs and Stratton building is there, and a lot of the new industrial development that's going on in there. There is a well and water tower site that is up on this location here. And then in the kind of reddish color or pinkish color here is what our 2050 plan here in the Village of Germantown classifies as the Freistadt district. It is an area that is projected both in the current comprehensive plan and the proposed 2050 plan to have some level of development that's involved in it. So that kind of gives the layout of the various things that we're going to talk about this evening. In October of 2020, then, there was an MOU that was approved that authorized the preliminary feasibility exploration of providing the service, as well as some agreement to pay for an I-41 traffic impact analysis that we were under the understanding was going to need to be done as part of the both what we were doing on our side, what Richfield was proposing, as well as what the state ultimately would propose on I-41 for that interchange. Then in the fall of 2021, we had an MOU that represented the increasing of the height of the Rockfield Road water tower. That height, at least for the village's perspective, allows for that water tower to actually serve this little corner here of the village, highlighted by the red marker. In addition, that MOU, the cost of increasing the height of that water tower was split between three parties, the Germantown, the Village of Richfield, and the folks at Washington County. When we look at the Northeast Corridor a little bit more generally, as I said, it's about 443 acres of land that they've identified. It is proposed in kind of their preliminary plans to have been 177 acres of business park or light industrial, 135 acres of what they call interchange commercial. So, the things that you would typically see on interchanges as you go up and down the freeway. About 70 acres of single family or small scale commercial, and then about 60 acres of mixed residential. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but that was the preliminary plans that they had kind of presented. Those preliminary plans, I think, were probably the biggest concern for a lot of both staff, and I know a lot of the elected officials as well, in the sense that that's potentially a lot of development. Do we even have the capacity to serve that, for example, among other questions that would come of that. One thing that has come up a couple times in part of the discussions, both with the village board here and the last listening session, is what about serving beyond the piece that we're doing? Isn't this really just the toehold into Richfield that then allows the village to serve more of Richfield in the future? The answer to that is that it's probably, it's certainly possible. Anything is possible, but it's probably unlikely. And it's unlikely because of three things. The first is that the subcontinental divide runs through the area. The blue dot there that you see is generally the center of the area that we're talking about in Richfield. The red line is the subcontinental divide. And so as you see, there's not a whole lot of Richfield that is on this side of the subcontinental divide. As if any of you have paid attention to what, for example, has gone in Waukesha, in order to serve beyond that line, there are additional approvals above and beyond just the local governmental bodies that are going to do it. Now, because Richfield straddles that line, I'm not going to lie to anybody, it's an easier process than Waukesha had to go through. It doesn't quite go as detailed and as complex as what Waukesha did, but it does involve higher up levels of approvals that would need to be done to do that. Likewise, MMSD has some approvals that are involved. MMSD has jurisdiction over effectively the watershed that feeds the Milwaukee River. That watershed more or less follows that subcontinental divide line, not surprisingly. And as a result, it would be a question of whether or not MMSD wants to provide service beyond that line or not, and what the terms for them to be able to do that. Again, MMSD currently serves areas that are outside of its kind of home area, but it's somewhat unusual, and it does raise another process that's involved. And then lastly, you have the Richfield Code. Richfield Code says that if you're going to have any public works project that includes the installation of sanitary sewer or water, or a combination, that it needs to be submitted to a public referendum. That would be there. Now again, code provisions can be changed, and so it's not a ironclad, this is never going to happen, but it is yet another step to do that. Obviously, a code change likewise would require the political will on the part of the Richfield board to change that requirement anyway. So you do have some levels of additional hurdles that would be there that probably make expansion unlikely, but certainly could be possible. Lastly, from the idea of just kind of the over here, we talk a little bit of the Freistadt district. We're going to talk a little bit more about it, but I just want to highlight that one of the things that we're going to talk about before we talk more in depth about the district itself is the concept that there are, as part of the proposal, two potential paths for utilities that would follow. You see the red line and the blue line there on the map. That is effectively two potential routes that had been identified. We would anticipate that that line will shift a little bit, in part to accommodate what may ultimately be some sort of frontage road that would run basically from the south here at some point. up to the north, and then where the water and sewer goes over here to serve Richfield, we likely would instead extend the road to the north. This area is already can be served by utilities that are already there from Holy Hill Road, and so that would all go to the north. Everything south of the railroad tracks would go south as we look at that. That wasn't right. I don't know why I jumped to the end there. Sorry. So if we then move to the intergovernmental agreement that is presently proposed, there are some general terms that we just want to highlight. In essence, it has various responsibilities on both parties. From the Germantown perspective, what it requires us is to provide service to the Northeast Corridor. That service is going to be limited, as we talk about in one of the next slides, but just generally to provide service to that full corridor. We are going to pay for potential material costs to upsize the pipe to serve that Freistadt district area if we need it. We're not 100% sure that we actually need it. We may be able to serve that area with what Richfield would put in which case there would be no additional cost for Germantown. But if there was, we would only pay the cost to upsize the pipe, which is a very small cost in the grand scheme of things. Likewise, we talked that there are going to potentially be areas that we're going to put a road through, where that road would go through, where we need to acquire right-of-way for that road. The acquisition costs associated with obtaining that right-of-way would be split 50-50 between Germantown and Richfield. Lastly, Germantown would be the one that owns and operates the entire system, both on the Germantown side and the Richfield side. From Richfield's perspective, they would create a TID to pay for the preliminary infrastructure costs. They likewise would pay for all of the costs associated with the installation for their service. That includes not only the initial installation that they would talk about, but as they look to fill in the entirety of the Northeast Corridor, they would pay for those expansions as well when they came. And then lastly, they would assist with any collection of charges if necessary. So if we had a customer in Richfield, for example, that wasn't paying, they would agree to assist us in helping to collect those past due charges. Obviously, it goes without saying, it's not on the slide, but just as Germantown pays for the half of the cost of the right-of-way, Richfield likewise would pay half of the cost of the right-of-way. Get a double slide here. So the general terms kind of continue. Service provisions. The initial service we anticipate would be only to what would be the TID area that they would create. That TID area is proposed to be effectively just an area of industrial and warehouse type use. Specifically, Richfield has indicated that there are some lands under contract there with an organization called the Hillwood Group, which is based out of Texas, as I recall. And their proposal is for a 1 million square foot building that would be, effectively a warehouse type facility in terms of that. Anything beyond that, service is authorized for the currently existing uses that are there within that southeast or the northeast corridor rather. But any additional uses or change in uses, so if you have a use of land and they want to change that use, those uses must be reasonably approved by the Village of Germantown before we would have to serve them. Under the IGA, the development would pay for the Germantown water and sewer impact fees that are associated with putting in those services. Likewise, they would pay for connection charges, just as all Germantown residents do. And then they would also pay for Germantown inspectors to go out and make sure that it gets installed correctly and that there aren't any problems. Lastly, with respect to general terms, there is a provision that is what we call a private well escrow. effectively, Richfield has agreed to put $50,000 rather in an escrow for the life of the tax increment district to effectively pay for the cost to deepen any wells or replace any pumps should water levels be lowered for properties within a half mile of that Rockfield Road well site. When we look at specific terms, in terms of sewer service, the proposal and the IGA contemplates that sewer service would be through a connection that goes basically through the Freistadt district. It connects at basically the corner of Freistadt Road and Goldendale Road, and then goes up through the Freistadt district, kind of following those two routes that we showed you in the red and the blue, and then ultimately into the service area in Richfield. The maximum flow under the IGA that we would be required to provide would be 0.7 million gallons per day, and Richfield customers would pay 120% of the rate that Germantown customers pay. So there is a little bit of a kicker, if you will, to provide that sewer service over there. Water service is a slightly different story. It's going to be what we call a loop connection. That connection will start from the current terminus of the water system on Rockfield Road. It'll extend west into the service area, loop through the service area, and then basically follow the sewer connection back down to that corner of Freistadt and Goldendale Road. There is a maximum flow that's associated with that of 1.1 million gallons per day. There is a difference primarily because there's two realities. Number one, we expect that there may be folks that actually use that water in a method that doesn't result in waste. They drink it, it gets spilled on the floor, they put it on the grass, those types of things. Likewise, there are just natural leaks and that type of stuff that happens as well. And so they get more water than they have sewer capacity. Richfield customers ultimately pay 100% of the rate that's set by the PSC. That is something that we just don't have control over. The PSC is the one that sets the rate. We don't know at this point until an actual application is filed as to whether or not that rate will be the same as what Germantown residents pay, or if the PSC might include additional costs that are there as well. We anticipate it would be the same rate, but it potentially could be higher just because we have more utility that we're then serving, and the rates are designed to cover our costs for that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the village engineer and public works director and let him take over for an engineering analysis.
Good evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the engineering progressed to determine the service to the area. A little background is this all started bringing sewer up to Holy Hill Road with the development of the Briggs and Stratton, Zilber development with the Briggs and Stratton and two other buildings. That formed the TID District 8, which funded the sewer and water to be brought up to the Holy Hill area. First building to go up was the Briggs and Stratton building. This is shown as just in progress with some walls and the steel up, and that's what started the whole progression of service to that area. To determine the sanitary sewer volume and how it would be served, we knew the sewer had to come from the intersection of Freistadt and Goldendale Road, but we need to determine the service area that could be serviced by that sanitary sewer. That's determined by the depth of the sanitary sewer and the topography of the land going from Freistadt going north and what the elevation of that land is. On this drawing, you'll see the red border. That is the area that the sanitary sewer can serve from the area of Freistadt and Goldendale. So we use the topographic maps. We apply the which is being looked at right now, the 2050 land zoning plan. And with that, with the zoning, the engineers have basic flows they assign to certain types of zoning: residential, single family, multifamily, commercial, industrial. All that land value has an accepted flow rate to assign to that land. And that was done here. And we determined how much flow that Germantown's area would have. We determined the capacity at Freistadt and Goldendale. And through that, we were able to determine what kind of flow we would have allowed for the village of Richfield. Same thing with the water. You see the blue outline, the bright blue outline. That is the water zone area that we can serve from the elevated tower at Rockfield Road and Gateway Crossing. Richfield area is signified to the left with a dashed blue line. The tower is capable of serving this area with the village's new well 12 at Rockfield Road and Gateway Crossing. The tank had to be elevated, as was pointed out earlier, for the lower left corner to serve Germantown's district, and it would also include the ability to serve the village of Richfield. From that, the water volume required also was determined, the same process as the sanitary sewer volume required. Again, we're looking at the 2050 zoning. We're assigning flows that are what is the basis to determine flow from areas, as I stated earlier. And we determined there was capacity left for the village of Richfield. Just a little discussion, quick discussion on the difference between the shallow well and the deep sandstone wells. Currently, shallow wells, the village has 3 shallow wells currently. The shallow wells, real simply, are just defined and separated by a sandstone layer, a shale layer actually. And in a shallow well, the water travels through large cracks or fissures. Usually that these cracks and fissures are very small and they're filled and sealed. So there's really not a chance of finding these wells in great numbers. We happen to find one of them. We have 2 other ones in the village that are the same way. If we would have put in well 12, 20 feet further from where it was, we probably wouldn't have been able to have a shallow well. So as we found the shallow well, there we went through a lot of testing. The deep wells, of course, go through the sandstone, through the shale down to the sandstone. We also have 3 wells. 2 of them require radium removal. So the difference going to the deep well, you do have the radium to be removed, which is a more costly situation for the village. During the construction of well 12, we monitored 5 private wells. These graphs, I know they're going to be hard to see, but it shows you that we monitor them not hourly, but probably every 4 hours. We had monitoring equipment in each well. It was recording the depth of the water above the monitoring equipment to determine the drawdown. At each well, the average drawdown was between 7 to 8 feet after we pumped well 12 at the maximum rate of 800 gallons a minute, and we pumped it for 72 hours. Very rare. The well in operation, a normal operation, that the well will pump for about 2 to 3 hours to refill the water tower. In that time range of running for 2 to 3 hours, the drawdown in all these wells was measured to be between, excuse me, between 1.5 and 2.5 feet. Brian talked a little bit about the future frontage road through the Freistadt district and the potential of where the sewer and water lines would run. This is just showing what we think may happen. His route was a little bit different, and that's because we're not quite sure. Property lines, topographic survey, we haven't done any of that yet. We're just starting to try to see where we think the sewer and water may run, avoiding wetlands and any other structures that might be in the way. This is the route that Richfield would follow in installing, if it's approved, the sanitary sewer from their area down to the corner of Goldendale and Freistadt. Traffic management in this area, that's always a question. There was a traffic study performed to analyze future traffic needs based on growth in both Germantown and Richfield. The Wisconsin Department of Transportation was involved in the analysis of this report. Traffic study was paid for equally by the Village of Germantown, the Village of Richfield, Washington County, and a private landowner. Village of Germantown will build the Hoy Hill Road, which is starting this spring, and we're including most of the needs for the future traffic that the traffic study revealed. Wisconsin Department of Transportation is considering various enhancements to their interchange to accommodate the future needs of growth in both villages. Yes.
All right, so I get to play village planner this evening. Our village planner had to leave unexpectedly on an emergency, and so I get to fill in. So this is going to be hopefully not too terribly rough on all of you, and I'll hopefully do as good of a job as Jeff would have. I want to talk just first about the Northeast Corridor in particular. We see here, this is kind of the map that lays out the areas that I talked about previously in terms of the interchange commercial down on the south end, the business park or the light industrial area here in the big green area, single family and small scale commercial here in the middle, and then the mixed residential up here. And you can't really read it on that screen, I don't think, but this is more small scale commercial and light industrial. One thing that you heard me mention that plans have already changed, and we know that. So, for example, in this area that is the mixed residential, where they were identifying up to potentially 700 units of apartment building effectively, we know that a single property owner bought about half of that land and put a single house on it. And so we already know that that area is not going to develop like they've otherwise proposed it to. Likewise, as we've done additional analysis, as that is bound to happen as we move forward here, the interchange commercial area, we know this little tail here is actually too high. We're not going to be able to serve that unless Richfield would add something additional on their side, a pressure pump, a small water tower, something along those lines to be able to serve that area. But short of them making that expenditure, we probably wouldn't serve that area as well. Why that is somewhat important is that when we look then at how all of these lay out, and this is a very small slide, kind of hard to read, but the bottom line on this slide is that this reflects each of those individual areas and what they potentially their maximum development was, applying the same standards that Larry just talked about in terms of the potential flows for that various types of uses. They projected out the various demands that they would need, and the bottom line is that when you look at that need versus what we're providing them, the answer is that they don't necessarily get everything they're going to need based on this agreement, but as Larry indicated, it is the capacity that we have to actually give to them to share based on what we project our growth will be. And so it helps, I think, allay a lot of the concerns about whether or not we have the capacity there or not for what's there. Recognizing that, again, this is based on the best case scenario, and we already know that that best case is changing as we speak. When we talk about the Germantown side, this is a piece of the 2020 land use plan map. And you see in the area, you have Holy Hill Road here kind of in the middle. This is the area that we currently have developed, it's mostly developed all the way out. There's only a couple sites left in that area for potential development. And you see in the blue here is an area that we identified as potential commercial or light industrial type uses moving forward. The green on the map signifies some level of single family residential through that area. The red line here, I should just note, is the area that the water tower that's going in. That's the area that water tower can serve based on the pressure that it would provide. When we then look at the 2050 land use plan and recognizing that it is just preliminary, we're going through that process. It ultimately needs to be approved by the village board, and it may change. But you see that we identify various districts within that. And you have, as I indicated, that Freistadt district in the red. That district is an area that is going to be kind of similar to what you saw in the 2020 plan. Again, kind of a mix of likely some sort of commercial or light industrial type uses to the west and more residential type uses, maybe some apartments as you move to the east along Goldendale Road. And so that plan is kind of where we potentially look to as the next area of growth within the village from our perspective. And certainly the proposal would provide the utilities that would enable us to move forward with that from here. Here is when we look at the kind of more specifics. This was just a plan that was put together by one of the village's consultants in terms of what potentially that might look like. And you see, again, you have that road that kind of comes up through there. You have the heavier uses along the road, and then eventually feathering out into some more single family in this area, some mixed type development along here. Again, this area being filled more or less, and really more residential type development again to the higher density than as you move farther to the east, but residential nonetheless, and then a zone of potential commercial as you continue to move north. So that's kind of what we envision potentially for that area, recognizing that I guess one question that did come up, and it may be important to note, is that adopting the intergovernmental agreement with Richfield doesn't tie us to this particular plan at all. The two are separated. We anticipate, however, at the staff level, that 2050 plan is really probably the worst case scenario in terms of intensity of development. And so we felt that was a good starting point to look at what our capacities were. And so that's why we use that as we look at modeling. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's ultimately what ends up happening in that location.
Right, and I'll talk a little bit about the financial impact of the intergovernmental agreement if it is ultimately adopted, and address some of the questions that were submitted that were given during the last listening session, as well as online, and in response to some of the other information that's available on the village website. First, I'll talk about the water and sewer rates and finances. On the sewer side, Richfield customers would pay full Germantown rates. So whatever anyone who's connected to the Germantown sewer system is paying for their residential or commercial sewer, Richfield residents or businesses would pay that plus a 20% premium. And those rates are calculated to generate a rate of return that's adequate to replace all infrastructure as it ages. So one of the questions that's come up is, shouldn't we be, as part of this agreement, if it does go forward, shouldn't we be asking Richfield to pay for the replacement of our aging infrastructure on the sewer side? And the rates are calculated so they do that. As those sewer customers are paying their quarterly bills, a portion of that money would go towards replacing infrastructure, and not only the infrastructure on the Richfield side, but the infrastructure for the entire system. And that premium, that 20% premium, is basically on top of all of those on top of the regular rates to cover the operating and the capital replacement costs, basically in compensation to Germantown residents who established the system and put it in place many years ago. And that 20% premium would have a beneficial impact to Germantown ratepayers, in that the village would be collecting more money from the Richfield side than the cost of providing that service. For the water utility, the rates that Richfield customers would be paying would be set by the Public Service Commission, a state agency that sets water utility rates for all water utilities within the state of Wisconsin. So if this does go forward, we would have to submit a rate case to the Public Service Commission, and they would review it and determine exactly what the rates would be for the Richfield customers. But that process is similar to what's done on the sewer utility side, where they look at what are the operating expenses, what are the costs of the infrastructure, and then what's a rate of return that the utility owners, the village residents, would expect to reasonably get back on that investment. I'd also mention just that increasing the customer base helps to stabilize utility revenues. One of the challenges of the water utility in Germantown is that we have a large customer who we are required to provide access and service to, who comes on and off of the system periodically. The larger we grow the rate base, the less negative or adverse impact that has on the water utility and for the other ratepayers within the village. So the larger the base, the more stable those revenues. And I'm going to get into some specific numbers, but in general, on both the sewer utility and the water utility, the estimated revenues should show that there would be either a modest or a significant beneficial impact to Village of Germantown sewer and water users. And this is new since the last time I presented to the village board. We did some calculations, ran through some numbers on what sort of revenue the Village of Germantown water and sewer utilities could potentially receive, and I have some different scenarios listed here. The initial development that's being proposed on the Richfield side is from a company called Hillwood, and based on the information that they've provided to us on their water and sewer usage, that would generate about $110,000 a year in sewer revenues, and $40,000 a year in water revenues, so a total of $150,000. The next two lines, half capacity and full capacity, refer to the capacity limits that are in the intergovernmental agreement. So on the water side, I believe it was 0.74 million gallons per day. On the sewer side, it was 0.4 million gallons per day. If on the Richfield side, they reach half of that capacity, that would generate $490,000 a year for sewer revenues and $210,000 a year in water revenues, for a total of about $700,000. At full capacity, that would be a little under $1 million a year in sewer revenues, a little under $400,000 a year in water revenues, so roughly $1.4 million a year coming into the village on an annual basis. And then the final line, the intergovernmental agreement would require all businesses or residents that are connecting to the system to pay the sewer connection fees or water impact fees that are required by the Village of Germantown. These are really difficult to estimate accurately what that could be. There's a lot of variables involved, but I did look at what the actual sewer connection fees and water impact fees were for businesses that located out in the Gateway Corporate Park, and using that to kind of as a guide for estimates. I would estimate that we would have $120,000 in sewer connection fees and about $25,000 in water impact fees, for a total of about $145,000. Unlike the operating revenues that I mentioned before, the sewer connection fees are one time. So that would be basically a one-time revenue that we would get in over a period of time. Those, whether it's Hillwood development, half capacity, full capacity, those would be ongoing annual revenues that would come into the village. One of the other questions that was raised was the impact on Germantown road programs and other capital projects. I think some of the feedback at the listening session and at the last meeting were, investing funds in additional road reconstruction or other capital projects here in Germantown. And one of the things that I have to point out is the sewer and water utilities are, for accounting purposes, called enterprise funds. And what that means is they're fundamentally separate businesses. Their finances are kept separate from all property tax levy dollars. There's no property tax levy dollars that go into the sewer and water utility. They're entirely supported by the fees, by the charges for services that they collect from their customers. So it does not impact things like road construction or other capital projects that are paid for out of property tax dollars. According to the Intergovernmental Agreement, the village of Richfield will pay all costs to extend service to Richfield. So when we talked about some of the sewer and water lines that would have to be constructed, Richfield would be paying for 100% of those costs. None of those costs would be borne by Germantown residents or Germantown taxpayers. And the agreement with Richfield, again, since it's separate to those sewer and water utilities, which are non-property tax levy entities, it would have no impact on things like road replacement or any other capital budgets on the Germantown side. So one of the things that Germantown would receive in return for providing sewer and water service to Richfield would be that infrastructure that would be constructed through the Freistadt district down to the intersection of Freistadt and Goldendale. And that is something that, if the preliminary 2050 plan goes forward, would be consistent with the comprehensive land use plan. The estimated cost to construct that is in the $7 to $9 million range to bring the sewer and water to that point. And that would be a cost that then the village of Germantown would not have to pay at some point in the future to install that sewer and water in that area. Germantown, we would, under the IGA, be responsible for upsizing. So if Richfield needs a 12-inch pipe, but we want a 16-inch pipe for additional capacity, we would have to pay the difference between the 12 and the 16, which is usually not as significant as just installing the pipes in the first place. And as we get further into the analysis, that type of upsizing might not be necessary. So in short, in that area, the Richfield contribution of that infrastructure would make development in the Freistadt district more financially feasible, at least for development that's based on water and sewer, as opposed to, future development in the area of a nature that doesn't require water and sewer. So also wanted to talk about the impact on the village of Germantown general fund and services. The general fund, just not to use too many technical terms here, is basically what we call our property tax levy supported fund. So that's where things like police and fire services, park and rec, library are funded out of our general fund. And the biggest source of revenue for the general fund is the property tax levy. So first of all, the Village of Richfield customers would pay 100% of the operating costs for the sewer and water to those two utilities. They're set up as separate business entities. The money is kept separate from the funds, from the general fund that provides general village services. So there's no direct impact on Germantown general fund or services. There would be, and this has been a conversation that's been brought up at the village board, as well as in some of the comments in the listening session, there would likely be, as development occurs in Richfield, spillover business from employees who are working there. One of the concepts that's been floated in Richfield is a business that could have 1,500 to 2,000 employees. Some of those employees would likely cross over Highway 41 and buy gas at Germantown gas stations, maybe go to restaurants at Germantown restaurants, or use other services on the Germantown side. And that could potentially require some services in terms of police services, emergency response if somebody gets sick in Germantown. So there could be some spillover costs. I think it's also fair to point out then that that spillover business would also create some benefits. Some Germantown businesses would benefit from additional business from people who are working in the Richfield development. And then the final thing that I would point out is this type of agreement does have the potential to create a foundation for future cooperation for services like library, fire services, et cetera. It is something that as you see more frequently as local governments are trying to do a better job of providing services at a lower cost to taxpayers. You're seeing more consolidation of fire districts, library facilities, and other services, and having that positive relationship with the neighboring community can help to contribute to that type of foundation in the future. Then finally, the last thing I was going to touch base on is the well remediation fund. The village attorney touched base on that briefly earlier. The engineering analysis that Larry went through indicates that the wells, that the residential wells, the private wells near well 8 should not be impacted by that well. There's been significant testing, been reviewed by the DNR, by multiple engineering firms and hydrologists and people that I can't even pronounce what their backgrounds are, their titles. However, Richfield did agree to contribute $50,000 to a well remediation fund that would be under the control of the village of Germantown and would be available to use to address any excessive drawdown of wells within a half a mile. And that fund would be available until the closure of Richfield's Northeast Corridor Tax Increment District, which is generally in the range of 15 to 20 years. At that point, when that tax increment district is closed, any remaining funds would be returned to Richfield. So we are here tonight with this public listening session, planning to put this on the village board agenda for Monday for potential action by the Germantown Village Board. And with that wraps up the presentation that we have for this evening.
Okay. So the purpose of tonight's meeting was twofold. First part was to present the information in more detail in regards to the intergovernmental agreement between Richfield and Germantown, so that you have more information of what's been put together within the document that we have before us. And then the second part was for us to hear from the citizens themselves that are impacted by this, or for any of those that want to make comment or have questions or concerns about the proposal as it's been presented. So that is now the part of the meeting tonight that we're getting to, which is citizen input and public appearance. And the village boards are to receive information and comments from the public. No formal action is to be taken. This is for listening session only. Our purpose tonight is to hear from you. What are your thoughts? What are your comments? What are your concerns? And as part of that information from you, then that can be used by the members of the village board in their decision of what they want to vote on in regards to this agreement. So if there is anyone here that would like to come forward and state a comment or a concern or any questions, please come to the podium, because we are being televised and there are people at home watching this and they'd like to hear what your questions and comments are as well. And if you could just mention your name and perhaps if you're from Richfield or Germantown, that would also be beneficial to us as well. So is there anyone that wishes to come forward at this time to give us any comments or any questions or any concerns? Don't be bashful. Is that microphone sitting in there?
Hi, my name is Judy Kautz, and I live in Germantown. My address is N135W20647 Meadowlark Lane. I don't know where your map went, but I'm in the, I don't know if you can show up that little map, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I guess that would work.
Off of Bonnewell.
Yeah, wait. You need to find Meadowlark Lane. We're near, okay, that's us. All right, so it says Fawn Court. We're right next to Fawn Court. Okay, so I first heard about this kind of by accident in a way, but I can't watch all the meetings and things like that, but I got information that they were doing, I mean, we knew about the well and everything, but when we came to a meeting in 2018, we talked about the people that came were saying that we didn't want them to be putting a well out there because we were concerned for everyone out in our area, in our subdivision, all the way around us that have homes, all are on private wells. And we know they're not going to bring water out there at this time, especially because when I talked to them about that, it said it was very expensive. And we would bear the cost. Well, we can't do that. So we don't want the water coming out there anyway. If we have a private well and it's working well, you want to stay on your private well. So anyway, I came out to the village hall on Monday, the 21st. I spoke with Larry in the DPW, and I had questions about the way the well was drilled. And he told me that they had drilled into the Dolomite Aquifer, which I've done a lot of research the last 3 days to find out what's a Dolomite Aquifer for, and what's a sandstone aquifer do, and what's a limestone aquifer for, and all that. And I found out where the wells in Germantown are drilled, how deep most of them are, and what aquifers they are in. And of course, there are 2 wells in Germantown that are in the deeper aquifer, and they do pull up radium, which is, you can't drink that, just like that. So they treat it with manganese to get rid of that. Am I right so far? Okay, got my facts. Good. Okay, so Dolomite water aquifers are really good water. So you want that. And according to the maps that I have seen, no, that's not the map, but there's a map of Wisconsin. The Dolomite Aquifer runs from, I've talked to geologists who have explained this to me way over my head, but he's telling me about the glaciers and all this stuff too. But it runs from the tip of the Green Bay Peninsula all the way down along the east side of Wisconsin. So you probably let you know that because you've seen the maps or whatever. And I'm sure Larry's familiar with these. So that whole area is pretty good to get into. You can get into a Dolomite aquifer fairly easily, and that's why residents like that, because it's good water, it's not too deep. Most of our wells aren't any more than 175 feet deep. If they are, it's only because they had to go deeper because they were starting to run dry when other things were going on. I don't know, maybe drought. We had some severe drought. But I know when we had the Hignite project and the blasting was going on, it caused some of the one of my neighbor's wells got contaminated from that because it kind of like, I think, shook things up. We had like mini earthquakes out by me, I call them. They damaged my house. So, I mean, I know they were bad, but anyway, I digress. So back to my conversation with Larry. When I asked him about the possibility of what is it going to affect our wells, he told me they'd done these studies on 5 of the wells, and there's at least more than 50 out by us. And they had put sensors in these 5 wells. And during the test that the well pump was run at, that well on well 12, the big new well, was pumped at a high capacity for 72 hours. and that all of the wells had a drawdown of anywhere between 8 to 10 feet. I confirmed all of that with the DNR because they told me the same thing. And they said the wells did recover within a few days of the test being completed. And so I asked him what would happen if the well, when they bring that well online, because right now well 12 is sitting idle, doesn't have the tower or anything. So there was, I said, what would happen when they bring it online if they ran us dry for some reason? It just happened. And the geologists that I talked to at the DNR, I spoke with 2 or 3 of them, and they all said the same thing. It is possible. We could draw you down. They could draw us down to a point where we are below our pump, and then we pump air and you burn out your pump. So you can do one of 2 things. You can lower your pump if it's possible. If they draw you down too far, you got to drill your well deeper, which means we would get into the crummier water down lower, which we don't want. So anyway, he said that if that happened, that we ran dry, his words to me were, you would have to prove that that well, pumping that well caused us to go dry. And my answer to that would be, why would I have to prove that? Why don't you prove your well didn't cause mine to go dry? So that's me as a homeowner. Okay, so I do have a lot of questions. I don't know if I want to ask them all here, but I have called people in the village and I have asked them questions and I have gotten some answers. Some of the answers I had to go beyond that to get answers because some people I talked to didn't know the answers. So I had to go out further, and that's why I went talking to geologists. And I spoke with Petwara, who is the liaison for the Germantown high capacity well permits. And she said, yes, it's all a done deal. It's been permitted. It was given permission by the DNR, and so on. So I have questions about, like, how deep is well 12? Larry, you know? Okay. Okay. And then it pumps, I would think I got the answer for this. It's going to pump about 1.1 million gallons per day. Is that correct? I think you said, somebody said that in the presentation here. You don't have that? Or you don't know how much it will be? At 1.1 million would be the capacity.
But that would be from the entire system, not just from that well.
Right, because I understood that too. And I found out that all of the wells in Germantown are interconnected. The water goes into the towers and it's mixed. Who told me all that? Somebody gave me a really good explanation about that in the village. I don't remember who I talked to. I have it in my notes. But anyway, so then this tower is, when it goes up, it's empty. You don't put it, up and put water in as you go. So you have to fill the tower. Do you know how long it would take to fill that tower? No. I mean, when it's when
First.
it's done being built and you've got to put water in it after you build it. You have to fill it. Okay, because the guy at the DNR told me, the geologist, he said to me that it could be weeks. Okay, but how much does the well, I mean, how much, that doesn't mean anything to me. I don't know how much it holds. Okay. In 72 hours. Okay, so I don't know what that guy was telling me. Okay. So I don't know what
We
he
don't have a
was saying.
microphone.
Um,
Just hang on.
Okay, not all my questions are going to be for but some of them will be. So, okay, my other question is, has Germantown received an approved facility plan from Sewer Pack or MMSD? No. Okay, so why don't they have that? Like, wouldn't you want to know, had that before you went to Richfield with an agreement that you're signing?
Sure.
You could sit in Terry's seat.
Yeah, there you go. Go sit in someone else's seat.
Push the button there.
With that, we wouldn't go and apply for the facilities plan with MMSD, Milwaukee Sewers District, or Sewer PAC, or PSC until we would have an agreement with Richfield. Otherwise, why would we go apply for something that may not happen? So if this agreement were to be passed, one of the next many steps is to apply with the facilities plan to those entities. They have final approval to allow the service to occur also.
Okay, because I spoke with two people at MMSD today, and they both told me, I talked to Kevin Schaefer, who's the executive director for MMSD, and Mickey Klappa Sullivan, who is the person that would be your liaison, basically. She's the manager for engineering and planning. And they both said that no one there has seen any plans or any thoughts from Germantown or Richfield on it. When I talked to Kevin Schaefer, he kind of laughed and he said, yeah, I said, have you heard anything about this? He says, yeah, I read it in the paper last week. So they didn't know anything about this at all. And I'm kind of thinking you're putting the cart before the horse. And that's what they said, that they felt like they should have been brought into this before any contract was written up or agreement was written up that might be signed between Richfield and Germantown. So you get a contract between Richfield and Germantown signed saying, yeah, we're going to go ahead with this. Then you go to MMSD and MMSD says, I'm sorry, but you can't put that sewer line out there because we can't handle the sewer.
I know that Richfield, I don't know the time frame, a year and a half ago, maybe. Richfield took it upon himself and their engineer submitted a letter to Mickey Klappa at MMSD with some flows they thought may happen. And so she may have forgot about that letter, but I know we did not, but Richfield did contact MMSD to do a superficial study, say, you know.
Yeah,
is
maybe
this
I got
the main
bad
issue?
information from her, but she told me that today. She said,
There is a letter that Richfield
have
I have in my file, they sent to MMSD.
Okay.
And if I could just add, there have been we've had a number of conversations with MMSD. I've talked with Kevin Schaefer. I've talked with Steve Jacart, their Intergovernmental Relations Director, and Brian, the village attorney, has talked to his staff within their corporation counsel office. So they're aware of this, and according to their processes, we should wait until we know if this is something
Oh,
that's
yeah.
going to happen.
That's not really
before-
not what she told me today, but I mean, you know,
There might
you
have been a
hear
misunderstanding.
one thing, I hear another thing but that's what she had said.
I
She
mean,
said they wanted to know if they had, because they would have to complete capacity studies and they would want to know what the billing was going to be, or have to figure it out for you to what the billing would be and things like that. Okay, so that was one thing that, they both said they hadn't seen any plans. So they both told me the same thing. We haven't seen anything from Germantown or Richfield, so I don't know what they said or saw, what Richfield said, but she's telling me they didn't have anything. And she said Sewer PAC, she called them before she called me back. She had called Sewer PAC to ask them if they had anything, and they said no. The DNR does have a record of a permit or something that they have, but no contracts. So, okay, the other question I have is back to the wells. Were Richfield wells out in their property, like they monitor all their wells and they keep track of them. If they have a drawdown on their wells, they do something about it. I'm not sure exactly what. I do know that in forgot what the name of that is, that little community thing they put down by the freeway. They had a bunch of private wells in there, and then they had a bigger well in there, and the bigger well drew down the smaller wells. And so instead of making the residents go deeper, they dug their well deeper into a lower aquifer so that they wouldn't affect their wells, and it allowed their wells to come back up. So I'm wondering if Germantown would be willing to do something like that to protect our wells. Would they monitor our wells to see not just 5 wells, but the wells to see, okay, your wells are here now, and you know, later on after we're running this thing for a while, now your wells are down here. I mean, you know, the worst thing is if you wake up and your pump is burned out because it was trying to pump water that's not available for it to pump because your pump is set at a certain level. In my personal situation, my well is 175 feet deep. My pump is set around 50. If that needs to go lower, that's fine. But then I need to know that, and I need to know it before it burns out. And I also think that they told me, one of the geologists had mentioned to me, Jim Kasdorf, he's a private well geologist, and I spoke to Dave Hart, another geologist. They both said the likelihood is our wells will be drawn down, not to the point where they're necessarily dry, but they will draw down. So if we don't have our pump set right, it could cause a problem. Their suggestion was from Jim Kasdorf. He said, have a licensed pump installer measure the depth to water for your pump. And I'm wondering if we have to do that, would the village pay for that? Because that's not our fault that they are putting this out there, you know, and it's already in. So it's not like we can say, oh, take it out. But I mean, I think they went deeper because then they wouldn't be in our aquifer. So anyway, we were told, because this is how this started, we were told in 2018, this well that is in there was going deep, like deep into the sandstone layer. At a 2020 meeting, you came up and you said it again. This is going deep. They went shallow. It's in the Dolomite. You told me that when I came to the office the other day, and you said it's in the Dolomite, and I'm like, our Dolomite? And you said yes, which means we're in the same aquifer. So there's a bigger chance of us being drawn down. So I don't know. That's what I have to say about the wells. And it sounds like somebody made the comment about you're going to be using like the bigger people who have the bigger, I think that was Steve, that was you you said like they're going to have the larger buildings. And then like it's going to be spread out more over like the taxpayer or not the taxpayers, but the water users are going to be having that cost kind of spread out more. Like, are they kind of taking up some of the cost, or the bigger I mean, I want to know, are the bigger water users paying their fair share, or are the little guys paying for the big guys to have water?
Yeah, the way the PSC, actually, when they go through their rate analysis, there are several components, but that's one of the main areas of emphasis, is making sure that each category of users is paying their fair share. So the PSC does that, and it's done according to state statute, but that's one of the main areas of emphasis, is making sure that each category of users pays their own fair share.
Okay, because I kind of misunderstood that, maybe that the way you're saying that it was going to be kind of spread out from the big guys' use because they're using more water, and then it would just sort of be calculated. I don't know, maybe I misunderstood.
No, what I was saying on the water utility side is that if you increase the number of users, then that when it comes to some of the infrastructure that's shared that has to be replaced, then there's more users to pay to spread out that cost, to cover that cost.
Okay.
So everybody's piece of the pie is a little bit smaller when it comes to
Okay.
replacing that infrastructure.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, I misunderstood you. Okay, so, okay, I just want to make sure the things that you didn't already cover that I didn't say. Oh, I know another thing I wanted to ask about is this $50,000 that they'd put aside for any kind of well issues out by us. I feel like that amount of money is like a drop in the bucket. If you had to do every single well well, okay, but here's what they did with that. They said a half-mile radius, right? Within a half-mile of the well. That needs to be increased. Because if you go into my neighborhood up there, you would literally are going to be cut off from that, and they are in the same Dolomite. And these are things I've been finding out from the geologists of saying they're in that Dolomite. If that goes low and you're drawn down, it could affect their wells too. So they need to be included in that, in my opinion. And I feel like that amount of money they're setting aside, that needs to be like at least 10 times that. maybe more. You need to figure out what it would cost to drill a new well in every single yard. That's a lot of wells and that's a lot of money. And so I just feel like, you know, if they're going to protect residents here, Richfield knows how to protect their own residents. They do this for theirs. Why wouldn't they do that for ours? That's a consideration that needs to be made for us, for our protection, I feel like. And I think that's kind of it for me. That's all I have to say. I don't agree with this whole sharing with Richfield, but maybe I'm not seeing the bigger picture, but that's my feeling. And I'd like my representatives for District 2 not to vote for this. So, thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. Is there anyone else that wishes to come forward at this time for citizen input or public appearance? Or has questions, wants to make comments? Thought. Oh, go ahead. Arm wrestle.
I have some questions before I make remarks.
And you are?
Oh, thank you. I'm a citizen of this lovely village and I like it the way it is. My name is Melanie Smythe and I live on Cedar Lane at 17938. And some of my questions are this $1 to $1.5 million of revenue, how is it going to be used?
That would be money that would go to the water and sewer utility. It would be used for operating expenses and then for replacement of infrastructure as it ages and wears out.
Okay, so it's just basically going to accumulate over time. I mean, this is 100 or $1 million to $1.5 million every year. Is that what we're saying? What
No,
are we saying?
There's
Or-
always expenses within the utility that need to be done. There's always maintenance that needs to be done. There's always replacement of older pipes
Okay,
that need to be made. There's always the cleaning out of sewer lines in different areas, catch basins, all things like that. That's
Okay.
ongoing, constant
okay.
maintenance.
It just wasn't clear from the
Mhm.
presentation. And so what's the percentage of that that will probably get eaten up by all that maintenance? All of it? Not 75%? Can the rest go to wells that residents might need to have re-drilled?
No, since the water and sewer utilities are separate entities, separate enterprise funds, there's limits on our ability to use those for utility purposes. We can't just take money from
Okay.
the water, since those monies are paid for by customers, it has to go back into services that those customers are receiving.
Okay, so what is the percentage then, based on typical maintenance and all of that, that would be using up the dollars?
That's a difficult thing to estimate off the top of my head. I mean, for example, our sewer utility, the annual budget is about $6.5 million per year. And the capital budget varies quite a bit. We just spent several $1 million on a lining project. That's a once every 20 or 30 year type of a project. There are some improvements to lift stations that are coming up that'll probably be, several $1 million. So some of that money does get put aside in reserves. Some of it does go to operating expenses. The water utility has annual budget of about $2.5 to $3 million. We're behind with some of the infrastructure replacement there. So I think that any additional revenue that comes in will try to help address some of those infrastructure deficiencies that need to be taken care of. But 100% of the revenues for water and sewer do go back into water and sewer and need to be used for those purposes.
It would be nice to see that all written down in a nice little spreadsheet or something.
It's part of the budget.
Yeah. Is it? But it's not in today's budget. You'd have to have a projection based on this agreement, right?
We would have to have it in the future budget if the agreement would get passed. Correct.
Okay, so
It would be part of the revenue versus expenditure budget. But the current budget shows what Steve has said in regards to what we're spending and what the revenues received are for today.
Okay, but that doesn't really address, if this were to go through, where the money would go and a plan, in other words. Okay, so how much is it going to cost to upsize the pipe that you want for further development potentially? Do we have estimates on that? I know prices change because of what's going on in the world these days. No. Yeah. Okay. And how many feet are we talking? 2,000 feet. Okay. Okay.
Isn't everything yet?
All right. Have we found out yet who the end user is for this $1 million square foot building?
The developer that has the land under contract is Hillwood Development. The actual, we don't know the tenant that, we don't know if they have a specific tenant under contract or when that would take place. So we don't know the ultimate tenant of that building, but we do know the developer is Hillwood Development.
Okay. And based on the size, where speculation is it's probably an Amazon distribution center or something like that.
Amazon is one of Hillwood's clients. I just researching on their website, they have done several projects in other places for Amazon. They also have a number of customers that are Fortune 500 type companies. These are usually, it's likely if this happens, if it's not Amazon, it would be some large company that people have heard of that would be coming into the community.
And as far as we know, it's a distribution center, correct?
I don't know that.
We don't know that. So could it be some kind of manufacturing then, but for that size?
It's possible.
Possible? Okay. In that case, they might need more water than,
The agreement limits it to 0.58 million gallons per day. So what we do know is that that's the amount of water that, under the agreement, that the village of Germantown would be providing to Richfield, and they could not exceed that. So if it was some sort of a wet industry that came in that used 0.58 million gallons per day, then that would be the extent of the utilization of water that they could have.
but as Brian says, things can change. And so that could change.
Only if the village of Germantown agreed to modify that, the agreement.
Right. And you're agreeing to the agreement in the first place, apparently, or at this point, possibly. Yeah.
So
So
only be if the.
that's my point, is that it could grow, possibly. The amount of, over time, there could be a second tower, and maybe more water, and maybe another warehouse or whatever they are. I'm just putting that out there. It's just an observation. Do you know what Richfield has done to inform their residents about the 1 million square foot place that's going in north of Quick Trip?
No, I don't. I don't know how they've communicated that.
So we don't know what the feedback from their residents is on this.
We did have a meeting in which both municipalities' residents were welcome to come to. The previous meeting, this is one of 2 hearing sessions that we've had on this. So there was some people there. I don't know if, what they spoke for or against, but Richfield, has been in discussions and has had this topic before their village board several times, correct? And it's been discussed in open and closed session, I would imagine.
Okay.
We do have the village president of Richfield here tonight.
Who's the president?
The gentleman that's sitting on the aisle.
I'm sorry. Oh, hi. So what's the general feedback from your residents?
You have to give him a microphone.
Larry's got one.
Hello, my name is John Jeffers, Village President at Richfield. For a good number of years, and in the last probably good year and a half or so, we have put this information in our newsletter that goes to every village resident. So the people that I've spoken to, the people that have called me, have been positive about it. We are trying to generate more revenue. As an example, we have a fire company that is in need of 5 more paramedics. And so that all costs money. One way to try to address that is through more industrial base, just like Germantown has done over the years.
Yes, and as I understand it, you have previously looked into funding this yourself, is that correct? And what was the ticket for bringing your own water over to your own $1 million square foot space?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Can someone repeat that for him there?
What was that cost? I don't have that with me tonight. Unfortunately, our village administrator's on vacation. And a lot of those documents and facts and figures, I'll take a wild guess and say maybe around $30,000 to do the study. Is that?
No, that's not what I'm asking. The actual
complete cost to bring it to Jackson and back?
No, just to have your own system.
Oh, to have our own system.
yes.
Okay, to have our own system. A number of years ago, that was studied, and it was between 40 and $50 million just to cover a small area, and that would only cover the area to the east of the subcontinental divide. We'd have to do something else to the west side, water running to Lake Michigan versus water running to the Mississippi. It was never considered feasible. The only time feasibility came in to our thought process, it was after some of the industrial buildings or water and sewer was brought to the east side of Highway 41.
Okay, so basically this would be establishing a better quality of life possibly for Richfield people. Is that what we're saying? Yeah.
Again, I
Okay.
can't quite hear you.
Sorry. Okay, Judy already talked about the wells. I'm against this. I think that there are a number of different reasons. I'm generally against the rapid development within our community. I think that there is a place for development, and I think there's a place for reasonable growth. But our mission and vision, which I read at the Planning Commission meeting on Monday, and I hope that those of you, the trustees who weren't there, will go back and review the tape. It was a great meeting in that there were a decent amount of people there, a lot of different comments about why people live here and want to live here and move here is because it is a predominantly owner-occupied housing type of neighborhood. We have unique properties of all sorts of different sizes, shapes, and designs. We have a lot of very laid back people who just like to enjoy their property and like to enjoy the surroundings. And I think that that's important for the trustees to consider, because what this will do, this rapid, this expansion of sewer lines will mean that development is made easier for developers who come in. And one of the takeaways that I had from the Planning Commission is that the development seemed slightly out of place for the nature of the way Germantown is, and we have kind of unique buildings, and it's a hodgepodge, and they're all different sizes and styles, and But that's what is part of the charm of this place. We don't want to end up looking like a Menominee Falls where it's development after development after development that is based on someone else's, from Milwaukee or wherever, idea of what should be a development. Also, as I said before, I am biased towards owner-occupied spaces, whether it's a business, whether it's a home, whether it's industry even, because the owner who's in that space tends to look after their spaces more. When you have tenants, they just don't care as much. I mean, yes, they're paying rent and all of that kind of thing, but there's a difference. And I think that that should be a priority for our village and for our staff and for ourselves to promote owner-occupied establishments, whatever they may be. Let me see. What do I have here? I thought a lot of the terms that have been presented are kind of vague. I mean, if I was a trustee, I'd like to see more detail about what the actual behavior between the parties is going to be. Perhaps you have been presented that and I just haven't come across it and been able to read it. But it just seems like there's a lot of vagueness around this and a lot of speculation about, well, we don't know what's going to happen. And, oh, this could change. And we don't really have enough information. And the fact that it doesn't sound like an actual hydrologist has been involved. We've had an engineering side of it, but maybe not some of the other parts in water behavior when multiple siphons are popped into a new system. So it seems like there's lacking things. I also object to the fact that only 9 people get to decide for 20,000 people whether this is a good idea. I think that's a bad ratio. And I also question, well, I don't know, is there any kind of, and this is going to sound really strange, but if we do this and they have a referendum in Richfield against extending water, is there any kind of legal implications there? I mean, it just seems like making a decision.
Just to be clear, they do not need a referendum to serve the Northeast Corridor. That is allowed under their code.
Okay. All right. It wasn't clear, so I'm asking the question. Going back to what is actually going to be built. I mean, if we have $1 million facility, whether it's distribution or production, manufacturing, those types of spaces automatically draw a lot of traffic. And we heard that the WSDOT is going to be looking at upgrading the interchange there, which means more traffic lights and things like that. Which means that more traffic will come, and truck traffic. And if it's distribution, we know that that happens at night. And that highway is a valley, and the sound will carry. And there will be light pollution. And the residents nearby who are on the Richfield side may not appreciate that. I don't know. Maybe they'll want jobs there. But one of the things about development and real estate and highways is that highways are considered natural barriers. If someone has to get off a highway and go onto the left side, there's very little chance in real estate thinking that they'll cross over onto the right side just because they want to go to lunch or something. It just doesn't happen. When McDonald's puts in restaurants, they know that they want the breakfast side because that's the side where they will catch the most amount of people. They know that they're not going to pick up dinner traffic as much. So to say that there's going to be spillover, I think is a little wishful thinking. I drove up there a week ago, and there's at least 6 restaurants within a mile of where that new place is going to be. There's also a grocery store, there's a liquor store, there's coffee shops, so gas stations, they're all over there. So the chance of someone coming over here, maybe so if they want to buy a house and live here or rent something, but I doubt very seriously that that's a valid point to make. Let's see, yeah, I guess my getting on with my last point is that we don't have the 2050 plan in place. And I know I sound like a broken record at this stage for anyone who's heard me more than twice. Sorry. But we do need this plan. And for things like water extension should be considered part of the plan. And I haven't read anywhere where this kind of discussion has occurred in the context of the actual planning. Now, maybe it has, and I just haven't been privy to it. But my experience with the planning sessions was that it was entirely superficial, and that we were spent time looking at ways in which buildings were arranged, not big questions like who are we and what do we want to be over the next 30 years. So I think that this is putting the cart before the horse, that we should have a plan. And I would like a no vote from the trustees on this. I also think that we should put a moratorium on discussing development with developers until there is a plan in place. That'll do a couple of things. It'll mean that we're not making mistakes until the plan is in place, and everyone, 60%, we should have an engagement rate of 60% of the population as part of the planning process.
There is a plan in place. The 2020 plan is in place until it's replaced by the 2050 plan.
Right, but I'm talking about, I'm sorry, not to be as clear as I should. I meant the 2050, the process of making the 2050 plan a current thing. We should be aiming for 60% participation of the residents for that. I mean, to date, 9% of people have commented on this plan for various reasons. It's great to hear that Richfield does a newsletter. It would be nice if we had a newsletter too. Another thing that would be helpful, and maybe the planning department would have more time if they weren't talking to developers, is fix the website. It's really difficult to navigate. Some of the links are wrong. They lead to wrong things. Like I was trying to look up a meeting and it was for some other meeting. So there are issues there, and it could be a great communication tool for things such as this, and for things such as the 2050 plan. I would also suggest that you probably need a communication plan put into place and thought through, like a newsletter, like series of emails, whatever it may be that you decide. But there's got to be some people who are in the communications field who live in the boundaries of the village to come up with some kind of a communication plan that you deploy. You know, a one-time notice that goes in the utility bill, and a postcard for those who are not on well and septic, for an important meeting that affects 100% of the village when it comes to planning sessions for the 2050 plan, to me is inadequate. There should be at least 3 times that a resident is notified of a meeting right before it's coming up for the planning process, the 2050 planning process. I'm not talking village meetings or anything like that. Because it's a unique series of meetings. It doesn't happen all the time. That's why. So again, I think that $90,000 has already been spent on the plan, from a rough calculation that Steve made. I would like to see before the next planning session, which is on the 11th of April, a summary of what has been done and what we've got for that 90,000 so far. And that should be provided to residents on the website prior to the meeting so that we can at least read it and be prepared before we get there. So thank you for listening to me. Please vote no. Let's not become Menominee Falls or even Kenosha, where they do have an Amazon warehouse already.
Thank you for coming forward.
One thought while the next speaker's coming up, this question has come up a couple of times about the cost of the alternatives, and I did pull out the report that was done for Richfield back in 2020, and I can just give a quick overview. They looked at three alternatives to get water and sewer to the site they were looking at. One was Germantown. They estimated the cost. They looked at three alternatives that ranged between 6.49 million and 6.78 million. But that was assuming connections at Rockfield and Holy Hill. So the Goldendale Freistadt connection is more expensive. They looked at sewer and water connections to Jackson. They looked at two alternatives, one at 9.8 million and one at 9.87 million. And they did look at constructing a new well tower wastewater treatment facility, and that was estimated at a little over 43 million.
Thank you.
My name is Katie. I live, Katie Coates. I live on Meadowlark Lane, also in the Woodside subdivision. I guess my response to this recent comment now would be, why is Richfield's water problem our problem? And why are we interested in Richfield's residents over the Germantown residents? So my particular interest being that close to this well, of course, is for our own private well. So I do have a couple questions just to start with, just to make sure I understand a few things. So in the presentation, it was mentioned that it's not normal to achieve high volume water flow in the shallow wells. Now this we kind of struck gold there in the shallow well, but is that something that's just sustainable? Is that, since it's not typical to get that kind of flow from that shallow well, is it just good right now? Is that something that in 10 years could be a problem? Does anyone know that?
From our experience and from the hydrogeologists we had on site for this whole project, and we have two current wells within that aquifer, the general feeling is, and no one can be certain about anything in the future, is that it is sustainable.
So it's, I mean, it's not certain. It's just a guess.
How long have the other two wells been on it?
They're both right here off of just north of Mech. One was installed in 1987, and I can look it up here, but the other one was installed in 1994.
Okay, thank you.
And Gels is always also in that aquifer.
Correct. And they'll pull 1 million gallons a day, depending on whatever they're producing, or if they're taking it from their well or from ours.
The difference there being, though, that the people in that surrounding area are already on village water, so they don't have to worry about their own well.
It's the same aquifer, though, as what your point was.
Okay. And then is it possible that this pumps, or well 12, it was run during the testing at 800 gallons per minute? Can it be run higher than that?
No, the permitting from the DNR has restricted the capacity of the well. We're only allowed to pump at the 800 gallons a minute from maximum, should look it up, I think it was like 14.5 hours a day.
Is that something that can ever change, or no?
That cannot change because that's in our DNR permit. We'd have to apply to the DNR for an amendment to the permit.
Okay. Is there any possibility that, say, the 2050 plan goes forward the way it's currently being proposed, and then Richfield develops further in their in this proposed water district, and then they request more water service from us in the future, maybe on the other side of 175? Do we have any way of projecting how, like, a large expanse of our water use could affect the wells in our area?
Currently, we looked at our modeling was based on the 2050 plan,
Okay.
and that would be looking at total build out of that area that I showed on our drawing, which to some extremities, that would take some years for the water system to be expanded with the sanitary sewer to that extent.
Mhm.
So our modeling captured the capacity required if that was to be built out based on the 2050 plan, the zoning that would be given to that. And you saw maybe some additions or ideas of what it might look like. So we captured all that. And then as far as capacity wise, we did not give the balance left over to Richfield. We kept about 25% for ourselves yet. So the volume we gave them still retained additional flow capacities in sewer and water for Germantown.
And that's, I think, important to note that that is based on the system capacity, not an individual well capacity.
Sure.
And the reality is that good planning, good water utility operations would be that you're not bumping against that capacity limit. You're going to add another well before you get close to that. So it's probably fairly unlikely that we'd ever get to the point where something would happen that would cause us to not have sufficient capacity.
Right. It should be noted, all the entire system of Germantown will be interconnected. The system up at Holy Hill will be connected to the system that supplies water to Village Hall.
Sure.
All the wells will interact, all the towers will interact with each other.
Okay.
So
So it sounds like there's some confidence that this won't affect our private wells. So is Germantown willing to put any money up for that? Because the 50,000 would not cover our subdivision or the houses around. I did just kind of a rough estimate, and no expert on this at all, but just a quick like internet search. Just that pump replacement cost, if you burn out the pump, averages $1,700. Drilling a well averages $5,500. If you multiply that times 50, and that's really just including our subdivision and maybe a few houses beyond that, the cost for all of that combined would be $360,000. So the 50,000 isn't anywhere near covering that. So, I mean, it's great that Richfield's putting up some money. I'm kind of puzzled as to why Germantown, you know, if you are that confident that it's not going to affect our well, like, can we have some money set aside from Germantown just to give us some peace of mind or, you know, ability to not have to foot the bill if something happens? So that's maybe rhetorical. Think about that.
But no, I can answer it. I just the answer is that we wouldn't in this agreement put anything that indicated that the Germantown would be putting up any money, because it's effectively assumed that this body recognizes at the end of the day that if we're all wrong and there are massive problems in that subdivision and something needs to happen, that we're going to have 50 residents filling this room every meeting until something is done. And likely we would figure out a way to deal with that, whether it's new pumps.
But
Well,
then, but are you going to cover the cost? We have nothing in
I mean,
writing. Like you
the answer
you know.
to the likely comment in the back is that if this body doesn't, then you're going to elect folks that will.
Right. Sir, I can't take that question from the audience because it can't be heard as part of this meeting and for those that are watching. So if you do want to come up forward, you can take your turn and ask that question. I'd be more than happy to take it at that time.
And please do. So I guess, you know, it's nice to just like hear guarantees, whatever, but it's not in writing. So that's not binding. You know, and my other concern with that too is, you know, you say like, oh, we can elect a new board. Meanwhile, we don't have water in our houses for years till we have elections. You know what I mean? Like that's, I don't love that answer.
And I understand why the question comes forward when we're looking at sharing the services over to Richfield.
Mhm.
But the fact of the matter is, as part of utility, we had to put the well in to sustain the amount of water that we need to have for a utility. The state statutes say that you must have this much water available as a utility based on your usage, and you must have this much in reserve. That's why that well went in to begin with. It didn't go in so that we could give water to Richfield. That came as a secondary of moving the services up to the Holy Hill area, being it close enough for the first time ever, since this has ever been discussed, for Richfield to see that opportunity for Germantown to share that. That's why they asked. But the well is in there because we needed it for our own capacity in order for us to maintain a utility within the statutes that we have to run a utility under. So that well is there and is drawing water, no matter if we give water to Richfield or we don't give water to Richfield. So if your concerns are about your well, that's going to be there if it's water to Richfield or not. I mean, it's
I
a
agree.
likely concern.
Yeah.
We've been told through the studies, and we've done everything that we can and brought everybody that we know in there to study it, because we don't want to drain water from an area either. We're not in here to make people's lives difficult. We're trying to make things better, and we're trying to provide additional services. So it's not our intent to hurt wells in the area. So we do things to try to protect that as well. And based from the information that we've been presented and the research we've done, we feel confident that we should not impact them wells. Am I going to put it in blood? No, because things do change and water does change. And maybe a fissure down the line or some sort of earthquake in Minnesota shuts off that fissure. I don't know. Anything is possible. But from what we know today, we're being told that we shouldn't impact the wells.
So I understand that, and I understand that things can change. So then I do think it would be reasonable then for Germantown to put up some escrow like Richfield to back us up on that financially in case something does happen, because it is unpredictable. So I would certainly ask for that. And I do want to just mention in this agreement, I'd like to just read it because I didn't see it word for word up in the presentation. So it's letter G in the agreement with Richfield, private well escrow. And it reads, Richfield shall establish an escrow in the amount of $50,000, which shall be used in the event that any private well within 1/2 mile of Germantown's new well number 12 experiences lower water levels necessitating the deepening or replacement of the well and or pump. The escrow fund shall be utilized to complete the work necessary. The escrow fund shall close upon the exhaustion of the escrow funds or the closure of Richfield's TID established for the Northeast Corridor, whichever comes first, and any remaining funds shall be returned to Richfield. So a couple of problems that come up there, obviously that $50,000 that I mentioned, the 1/2 mile radius, half of our subdivision is outside of that 1/2 mile radius. So anyone in that area should be concerned with that. And then just that once that fund is exhausted, which would not take long if multiple families had, or homes had problems with their wells, once that's exhausted, anyone who has a problem with their well after that is out of luck and has to pay the entire bill. So that's alarming. What is the solution if, so say there was some catastrophic thing, all our wells went dry, something terrible. What would be the solution? Is it possible to dig the well number 12 deeper into the other aquifer? Or would you be looking at extending water up by us?
Are you saying all wells or just that area?
For our, for that
Because there's two
subdivision.
plans. If it be all wells in Germantown, the easiest solution, and the one that's most available would be getting water from Milwaukee. And that's available to us anytime we've chosen not to take that.
And what is the cost to homeowners on that? I mean, do we have to pay for it to be extended up to us?
In most cases, for those that want service that don't have it, they would pay for it from the property line to their house.
Okay. So not actually bringing it like up the road to our subdivision?
Right, because in most cases, you're responsible for the lateral, that as it goes through your property, we're responsible from the valve to the street.
Okay. And I just wanted to note on that, like currently we pay about $200 a year to get our septic pumped. And my understanding is a typical quarterly water bill is about $200. So that's a 4 times increase on the cost. Not to mention the cost of putting the extending the pipes from the road to the home. One kind of just moving away from the well thing a little bit, have traffic studies been done, particularly around the Holy Hill Road on and off ramps? If we had a situation which sounds likely to have some kind of large development with a lot of employees in Richfield, at 1,500 to 2,000 employees. Like that will obviously have a big impact. That on-ramp, I don't, for anyone who lives over there, to go south onto I-41 from Holy Hope Road is a very dangerous on-ramp. It's very short, it's on a curve, it's on a hill. Been a lot of accidents on the curve. Obviously, if there's a place like Amazon, there's gonna be a whole lot of traffic for employees and then delivery trucks and everything. So have studies been done on the impact in that area for the traffic?
Yes, there was a traffic study that was completed that Richfield, Germantown, and Washington County worked on jointly along with the State Department of Transportation. And as a result of that study, Department of Transportation is looking at possible changes to the on-ramps. And we'll say that is independent of this decision, that based on the development that DOT is forecasting in that area in the future, that interchange is probably going to need some improvements.
Okay.
And a share of that would be split between Richfield and Germantown based on proximity of where you are to that interchange. That enhancement has been considered beyond, like Steve said, beyond this development, just for future growth. The Department of Transportation has looked at that.
Okay.
And part of the consideration that we've proposed to offset some of that or offset some of that traffic is perhaps you should consider an on-off ramps down on Freistadt Road. And that would cut that traffic in half. And they have shaken their heads at us about that, but we are still looking at that possibility because we see some advantages, not only for traffic in that area, but for our costs going forward if we would have to enhance and improve that whole intersection. We already will be improving it with some of the road repairs that we have from the TIF that is in that area. But when the Department of Transportation gets involved and the federal guidelines for how ramps have to be and how they have to be built now, those costs become quite higher.
Sure. Okay. One last point, regarding any payment to back to the well thing again, I missed a point. Just that if, say, I had a problem with the well, do I have to prove to the village or to Richfield or whoever's potentially contributing some money to that, do I have to prove to them that it was this well development and the water use from well 12 that caused my well problem?
During the tenure or the existence of the escrow, it would just be if water levels dropped and you had to replace a pump, you needed to drill deeper, whichever, then you would just get paid. There's no proof aspect to that.
Okay.
Obviously, outside of that, then we would look at potentially other issues, but at least during the time that the escrow is in place, there is no proof element to that.
Okay. Is there anything in writing that just, I guess, states that? Just like what the process is for us to get, like, to apply for the money?
Who to
Like,
call
would you have to,
first, that
right,
kind
do you have
of
to
a
like
thing?
apply for it, or do I just call the village and say, hey, I've got a problem, and they're like, okay, here's some money?
There isn't yet, but yes, I mean, if the IGA is approved and the escrow is created, we would create policies and procedures in terms of how that would work and would be written at that point.
And that is a direct function of the village attorney.
And I would just add, I would anticipate there are issues that come up from time to time in the village where it's believed that something the village has done has caused some harm or some damage. And those typically go through the appropriate committee, in this case, the Public Works Committee. So I would expect that if this is approved and that escrow is created, that's what that process would look like. That the resident would inform us that of the situation, and staff would review it, and then the Public Works Committee would make the decision of whether or not to use the funds.
Okay. Okay, I think that pretty much does it. So just to kind of sum up my opinion on this, I mean, I would prefer that we weren't doing any of this, but that ship has sailed. But I would encourage the board now to at the very least do something to protect the residents near this development, near the wells, by increasing the escrow amount or Germantown contributing to the escrow amount at a reasonable amount. I mean, like I said, if there's widespread problems, 50,000 is not going to cover it. And then I would also recommend extending that area beyond a half mile that people could qualify for that money. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. Thank you for asking your questions. Sir? Okay, good. I'm glad that that was able to happen for you. Thank you. No, you're fine. You're fine. Anyone else wishing to come forward? Sir?
My name's Scott Heffley. I'm a Germantown resident for almost 30 years, and I live a mile and a half south of here. So would be unaffected from the standpoint of my well going away. I've been on village water. So I think what really I've learned here, and I don't know if I'm being objective or not, but it doesn't affect me personally in that my well's going dry or any of that. But I look at it, I have a background in finance for 30 years. So I look at it financially, and I see development and I see this, and I know that when government's involved, whatever projections they put out always go higher. I mean, we see that state level, we see that federal. We know what happened here. We passed a referendum for the schools, 84 million turned into 106 million. Look it up, it happened. So my concern is that this is just going to turn into, for lack of a better word, a boondoggle, okay? A boondoggle means it just goes on and on and on. The costs never end. And once you build it, you can't go backwards. You can't take sewer lines out. You can't undo water. And, there it is. Now, I think I know why this happened. Oh, how do you know how it happened? It happened because Richfield is going through the growing pains that Germantown went through in the 80s and the 90s and now, okay? Germantown has spent, I don't know how many, $100 million, I don't know, to extend MMSD lines all the way up to all those 200 new homes being built, all the way up to Briggs, all the way up here, all the way up there. We as a community have spent millions and millions and millions of dollars to bring this all forward. And now we need to have a good relationship with Richfield. We do. I mean, they're our neighbors. We got to get along. But we also are the cheapest alternative for them, okay? They don't want Jackson water. They don't want West Bend water. They don't want Hartford water. They want our water because we're the cheapest to hook up to, because we've paid the infrastructure costs as a community. That's my feeling. If somebody wants to prove me wrong, that's fantastic. Now, quickly with that, I'm not a history lesson, even though I'm getting older, but I moved here in 1993. Richfield was an unincorporated town. I don't remember if they had 1,000 people. It was 700 or 800, maybe it was 1,000. They were unincorporated when I moved here. And then they incorporated because they saw growth and they started building. They incorporated, they put in a government, right? So I moved here in 1993, where almost 30 years later, they have over 11,000 people and growing, right? That's a big growth, way bigger than Germantown, bigger than Jackson, bigger than West Bend, bigger than Hartford. So Richfield desperately needs our water to continue growing, okay? They have to have it, and they want it from us because they can't grow their business base without our water. So I don't want to use the words desperate, but they really, really, really need our water, okay? And if we give them that water, this is just the beginning. I don't care what anybody says. You're on the wrong side of the Continental Divide. You know how that works. You got to bring water over the top. Look at Waukesha on the internet. They had to spend all this money. They take water from the lake and they have to give back more and blah. Think about the cost of that. So I don't think it's a great idea for Germantown. As a Germantown resident, I'm biased because I think the costs, I don't think we even know. It's been proven we don't really know the costs of all this stuff. We don't know what the impact, we're saying we got to pass something. We have to pass it so we can see what's in it. Anybody hear that before? And I don't know that that's a great way of doing things. I think we need more research. We need to look into it. We need to look at what other communities have done, whether in the state or elsewhere. We need more impact study. I don't mind spending the money. I'm not going to say, well, don't spend the money on it. Spend the money, do it right, have actual numbers. Because if this village board says, hey, this sounds great, let's do it to help out our buddies, that's fine. That's all you're doing. There's not going to be any spillover. Come on, people. You're not crossing I-45 to go to Germantown to Mobile when you have a quick trip that everybody in the state goes to right on your back door. It's not happening. So it helps them. In my opinion only, it doesn't help us. And just a couple things I picked out very quickly. I know my time is probably short or over, but little fine points. Germantown handles the billing of all the utility customers once we put this in, if we do it. Who pays for that? Well, Scott, it's only postage. It's only mailing. Who pays for that? Do we know? I don't know. Here's the other thing. Germantown owns, operates, and maintains the sewer lines. We own the sewer lines in Richfield. Okay? Guess what that means, folks? That means clearly that if there's a problem, it falls on Germantown, no matter what, because it's in the Intergovernmental Agreement that you're trying to agree to. If we're maintaining those lines, every little problem is Germantown's paying for. And there's not enough money in the water utility to pay for that. I don't care what anybody says, because if we're collecting the fees, that is going to pay for aging infrastructure that we have now, not the future aging infrastructure, because we have needs now. If it goes in the pot, just like every other governmental entity, it's going to get spent right away, because that's how they do it. So I don't see hard numbers, and I'm a numbers guy, and I don't apologize for it. I don't see contingency funds to help out the people affected by it. Now, me personally, the only way I'd be affected is if you raise my taxes, okay? If there's Richfield folks here, they're probably not real happy if they moved here in the last 7 years, because their taxes have gone up every single year. They got hit with a referendum for the schools. They got hit with this and hit with that. But really what they're finding out is the reason their taxes are going up is they're growing and they need stuff, okay? And Germantown has seen that. In the 80s, the taxes went up. Go ask people who have been here. I got here in the 90s, taxes went up. 2002, they're building 200 new homes. We're talking about 2050 plans, all this stuff. Taxes, taxes, taxes. They can't run sewer lines without raising your taxes. They can't run water lines without raising your taxes or raising your use fees. I mean, whatever you want. So, and in general, when we lure in big businesses, okay, we give them, and I'll speak for this generality, not talking to anyone in this room, sweetheart deals, okay? Foxconn got a sweetheart deal, Amazon got a sweetheart deal, which means that you give them land for nothing, you pay for the infrastructure, you know, you wait 5 years to turn on property taxes and then they complain about it and you have to make an adjustment. All that stuff always happens. So I'll just say and finish in saying I'm skeptical, okay? And again, this does not affect me because I don't have a well. I'm on city. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that wishes to come forward to speak for a citizen input or public appearance? You want the microphone, Fritz? All right. Just watch that step there.
Okay, unaccustomed to public speaking as I am, I really have to ask for your cooperation. Okay. My name is Fritz Gierach. I've lived in the village of Germantown all my life. I'm on 19157 Holy Hill Road. And if you send something to me, you have to use the address of Richfield. That's only for the postal service. I pay my taxes to Germantown. Now, I can remember when the sewer service started out, Germantown itself was 1 square mile. And the gentleman that was just up here talked about population. I can remember the sign when you enter Germantown, the 1 square mile, the population was 391. Now you're probably thinking, boy, that's really an old part up here. I'm getting there. And then the village of Germantown, a small portion was annexed to the city of Milwaukee. That was the town of Germantown at the time, and that's when the village petitioned to annex the town to the village, and we now have almost all of it, but we got 36 square miles minus a little bit for the village and town. A lot of my questions have been answered, or what I wanted to talk about, but I just want to go on the sewer line that goes from the northwest corner of the village to MMSD. It does have a capacity limit. I don't know what the capacity limit is, but if you allow the village of Richfield to discharge their sewer into our system, is there or will there be a formula for the village of Richfield to pay their share for extending an additional line to MMSD? And will MMSD even allow that? I guess the word MMSD came up.
Mhm.
And you don't have an answer. I didn't hear that there was an answer for that, right?
If we're close to capacity or if they'll allow it,
So if they'll even allow it.
we won't know that until after we petition it if the agreement gets passed.
Are they allowing, okay, so you don't even know if they're allowing Richfield to hook up?
We would petition them after the agreement, correct?
Yeah, okay.
We don't have it, we don't have anything that says that we will allow it at this time because it's an unknown.
Okay, so Mr. Krecklow, you mentioned that the village of Germantown, I went through the whole thing that was on the TV as far as, or the computer, as far as the contract. But you mentioned that the village of Germantown and the village of Richfield would have to be responsible for maintenance of the system. Is that correct?
Well, under the agreement, Germantown would be responsible for maintenance of the system. The funding would come from the rates that are charged to the users.
That 20% won't cover that. It won't.
Well,
Believe me.
and to be clear, the rates are structured to cover all of the expenses. So there's no subsidy from taxpayers to the sewer utility. It's all of those costs are covered through the bills that sewer users pay on a quarterly basis. The 20% would be on top of the rates that are calculated to cover all those costs.
Right. And if MMSD raises their rates to us, then we spread that across all the users. You know.
Yeah, I understand that. But what about if an additional line would have to be installed if we reach capacity? Now that's in addition, that's not a maintenance of an existing system. That's adding to it.
But that would be, again, that would be covered through the rates that all users of the sewer system would pay. So the Richfield users would pay for their portion. If you think about it in terms of how much we send down to MMSD on an annual basis in the entire capacity of the system. So if 80% of that or 90% of it or 95% is from Germantown and 5 or 10 or 20% is from Richfield, since everybody's paying the same rates, each community would pay proportionally for their share of it.
But if we do have to add an additional line, I mean, you're talking about $9 million here for the village of Richfield. If we would have to add an additional line, that line is going further in miles than this line to hook up Richfield.
Yeah.
And it would be very costly. The sewer commission or the the commission in Germantown does not have that kind of funds around. So they'd have to go borrow money and raise the rates substantially. Now, the only reason I'm bringing this up, when we're talking about the contract, if you would do this, something in the contract should be spelled out that Richfield has to pay their fair share. If it's based on the volume that they use it for, what? Because they're not paying anything for the line that comes up there right now. They're just hooking into it. Right? That's right. They're not paying any part of the cost of the line that we did back in whenever it was. I remember when Tenor Brothers from Green Bay came in and put the initial system in 1950.
No, they haven't paid any cost to bring it to where it stops currently. You're correct.
Okay, but that's, I want to make sure if you do this, you should make sure something is in the contract that we can recover that from the village of Richfield's portion.
Okay.
Okay, with that, I guess all the other questions I did have, a lot of them were covered, like the area that's going to be covered from what you read in the paper and what's actually going to be covered now is greater because it goes on west of 167 or 175. 175.
A little bit, yeah.
165 and 175. It's only a little off.
175 and a half, whatever it takes.
Okay, but I believe in cooperation with the adjoining municipalities. However, and this goes to the village board, your first responsibility is to protect our taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Fritz. Is there anyone else that wishes to come forward to make comments for citizen input or public appearance?
I won't go that bad. Brian Dupius, W143N9867, Ridgewood Lane, live down near State Highway 145 and county line. So this area doesn't directly impact me at all, but obviously I'm a taxpayer and a citizen of Germantown since 2003. So first and foremost, I want to thank the village board for these listening sessions. I've been around public government for over 30 years. There's boards that you can make these decisions in public meetings and not set up these special sessions. So I do commend the village of Germantown, village of Richfield for continuing this dialogue. I've been around land use issues, planning, surveying, engineering for 30 plus years. And the one thing I think this board, and I understand there's citizens here, but you are representing 20,000 people. This board needs to understand regional cooperation and how important that is. And some of the benefits I heard here tonight was the village could get $7 to $9 million of infrastructure installed in a Freistadt area to service this area in the future, which without regional cooperation, we wouldn't have. We're getting studies paid for, a third, a quarter traffic study. We're getting a third of the tower height being paid for. That's going to serve part of the village of Richfield. This is all happening potentially because of regional cooperation. And I emphasize those words because finances do matter. And right now we are the cheapest alternative for Richfield. Richfield has not stopped raising this question. So guess what? At some point in time, Richfield, if we close the door on them, they will figure out how to get this done. And once again, we lose out on potential $7 to $9 million of infrastructure, other services, higher sewer rates, things like that. And if there's one thing you learn is through history, watch what happens in other places. And it surprisingly was mentioned this evening. Foxconn landed in, little old Racine County, dropped right next door to the town of Yorkville. Town of Yorkville, 3-member board. Town of Yorkville has a small interchange. Forever was supposed to be served by Racine County Sewer and Water. Racine County Sewer and Water looked at it, or Racine Sewer and Water, looked at the opportunity and said, this is great. DNR says you have to come to us. Everybody knows you have to come to us. We've oversized it for it. Here's the bill. Financial analysts, lawyers, everyone looked at it, said there's no way we can pay that bill over a 30-year period. State of Wisconsin, DNR said, you guys are right. We'll let you put your own wastewater treatment plant in and your own water facility. And guess where Hillwood is right now? It's in little old, town of Yorkville. Now Racine sits there, oversized things for years, thinking they were going to service an area, never going to service it, never going to recapture it, have oversized lines, probably don't perform as well. But I just want you to think about that before you slam the door on regional cooperation. I understand there's a lot of questions out there, but please continue to move towards a cooperation with Richfield and obviously with Germantown's interests in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
Hi, I'm Mark Weyer from Hubertus. I just want to compliment the village board, the village planning commission. You guys got such a well-balanced tax base. You got good light industrial, you got good retail, you got good residential, and so on. It helps offset the taxes for the residents when you have industrial development. It helps out quite a bit. You want to impact the schools, you're saving money there with light industrial. And as far as a spillover, I'm from Richfield, and we do a lot of shopping in Germantown, your grocery stores, your hardware stores. But I think being a good neighbor would be great for both communities, for the economic development. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. Is there anyone else that wishes to make comment for citizen input or public appearance at this time? Comment, have questions, express concerns. One last time, anybody else? I have somebody online that's joining us via WebEx that would like to make a comment. Mr. Jeff Braun. Jeff, are you there? All right, go ahead, sir.
Jeff Brown, I'm on Cedar Lane in Germantown, and I've just got a few comments to think about. And as we look at Germantown, water is a resource, land is a resource. We're talking about giving one of our resources, access to one of our resources to a local municipality, and I think the benefits of this water agreement to the Germantown residents is minimal and truly not a number that's even been quantified. When you guys were asked today about the quantified numbers of this, it couldn't be answered. Personally, from a business perspective, I think a 20% increase is nothing compared to the risk to our residents. And the risk being in wells and other things that really can't be identified until things happen. And why take the risk if we're not going to have a huge benefit for our residents? I think the Mequon Goldendale development is going up quite quickly. I don't believe that it's full, but I do think the growth has been good. I say let's see how this finishes. When you think about it, would a gas station offer to supply water and sewer to another gas station across the street? Really what we're doing is we're trying to give Richfield the resources, develop their part of their community to compete with ours at the risk of our resources. It doesn't make sense. Why do we not need a referendum to pass this? And what would be involved in answering this via referendum? I don't know the answers. I'm not a government official and haven't been involved in it, but I would like to know. Again, I think the benefits to us as residents is minimal. The risks to our residents are real and likely. My vote or recommendation is that you guys consider saying no. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for speaking out. Appreciate it very much. And thank you for joining us via WebEx. Is there anyone else that wishes to come forward for citizen input or public appearance? Is there somebody? Okay, we have Is it John? Oh, John Jostin wishes to speak. John, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you. I'm with David J. Frank, the property that is actually shown on the drawing, owned by Orange Blossom at there on Freistadt Road. I had questions that this gas and water line would likely go through the or just adjacent to us on a property we rent from Freistadt Properties. I'd put nursery crops on. I wondered if you could explain a little bit about what kind of a path of demolition or that they would use as they just installed the water and sewer lines. Is that like a 20, 30-foot wide path, or would it be more like 120 feet? That would be what would happen when the road would go through later? And the second part of that, how is this land being acquired or paid for? And because the Freistadt property is not our property, but we lease and plant trees on it, which isn't like a farm crop, an annual crop, that it's like takes like 5 years or so. How would we be? How would the compensation or something like that work on something that is something that's not harvestable and would potentially be destroyed?
Larry, you want to take the first part of that question?
The path needed for installing the sewer and water, just for the sewer and water path, they're separated by 10 feet. Usually we take a 20, or depending on the situation, 20 to 30-foot wide utility easement if we're to go through private property. If these utilities were to end up in a roadway, we would probably be looking at, I'm thinking a 100 to 120-foot wide right-of-way, and that all depends on the size of the road that we want to put through there. It could be an 80-foot right-of-way to a 120-foot right-of-way at the time a road would go through. We're hoping that the utilities would be installed in a path of a roadway, but initially, if it's just an easement, we'd usually require a 30-foot wide easement that would give us ability to access those lines for maintenance purposes.
Brian, you got any answers for the second part of that?
Sure. In terms of how that would be valued, certainly nobody, I don't think, intends to go this far to the method of utilizing eminent domain, but I use that term just because there is a statute that really kind of defines for us how we're supposed to value property that might get acquired by eminent domain, and so the process would be very similar. And so typically in a situation like yours where you have a landowner, there's a portion of the funds that are paid to the landowner, and that includes kind of compensation for the fact that there's crops or plantings that have value that are part of that. Typically, what would happen is that your lease with the landowner probably addresses how any eminent domain proceeds would be split. And if there was not agreement between the two parties, meaning you and the landowner, what we would do is typically those funds would be just deposited with the clerk of circuit courts, and then you guys could litigate over how that fund would be allocated. But that's obviously assuming the worst case scenario. I think both the village of Germantown and Richfield, certainly are going to go into the negotiations hoping to just get it done amicably and deal with the issues that are raised. So,
Sir, does that help answer your questions?
There was another part that when I saw it last time, they said that the actual path is still in flux. Has that been defined any better in the last couple of weeks?
No. No,
Okay.
it's just two possible paths, but with the further engineering studies and some test borings, it would help to determine exactly what would be the best path, best on cost and engineering estimates. Because we don't, we're not always sure what's underneath, and you'd want to go the path that would allow the best cost per square foot or per foot as you extend that line through, and you're not wanting to blast the whole thing through if you don't have to.
And certainly the other part of that too is just what I just mentioned, which is, cooperative landowners are going to go a long way to how that route goes as well. We're going to work with the property owners to the extent that we can to identify routes that are going to, both limit damage to existing uses and planned continued uses, as well as to potentially maximize opportunities moving forward with vacant lands that could have different things. So it's in flux. I think the negotiations probably are going to go a long way to helping drive where that route goes.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. Anyone else wishes to come forward for citizen input or public appearance to ask questions, express concerns, provide comments? No one else? One last time, anybody else? For all those that are here, thank you for coming. We appreciate that you've come and expressed your concerns and your desire to learn more. And please know that this will be before the village board on April 4th, which is our next regular village board meeting. So that's Monday, April 4th, starting at 7 p.m. here in the Village Hall boardroom. It'll be put before this body for discussion and vote at that time. Please feel free to reach out to your representatives. If you have other questions that you think about after you leave this room, please feel free to reach out to me or anyone that is your trustee for your district, and we'll get your answers as quickly as possible. I try to answer everybody that reaches out to me in a quick manner. If I've overlooked anybody in this room, I apologize. I was searching it, and don't tell my boss this, while I was at work, looking for anybody that was responding tonight so that I could get them an answer quickly. But if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us. And again, you're welcome to come to the meeting on Monday if you want to hear about how the board decides to go further with this particular proposal. Again, thank you for coming tonight, and thank you for your input. We appreciate it very much. With that, then, we are adjourned.